Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to drop it a like. If you enjoy the content we put out here, please be sure to subscribe. We are still a growing new channel, and it really does go a long way for us. If there's anything you would like to add to the conversations, we will be replying to all comments. So yeah, thank you guys so much. Hope you enjoyed this video.
Levels. Turn on my camera, test that too. Shoobity bop bop doobity doo.
How's your day been, mate?
Just like just boring, man, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, so I had my PT cancelled.
Mm.
The gym class that I had on was there was only 2 people on it. That's fine, I don't mind that, but, actually, it's not really any of those things, to be honest, why it's boring. I just mentally, for whatever reason at the minute, I'm just I don't even know how to class it. It's not burnout, it's not like one of those where I feel exhausted because I've done too much work or anything, like, I've worked
Yeah.
this week normal. It's just one of those weeks, man, where I just can't be arsed. Like not even in terms of work, but I have had little to no interest in doing, like things that you normally look forward to doing. Like, so for me, like having a bit of a game and a socialize over the PC, like just haven't been interested in that.
Mm.
Haven't been interested in watching, just haven't been interested in anything.
Just super low
Which
energy week.
yeah, just one of those where
Yeah.
just going through the motions, the kind of week where I have to remind myself that it's not all fun and games all the time and it's okay to
Yeah.
just not really feel like doing anything sometimes. I've still done the things that I need to do,
Yeah.
but um it's just been very up and down in terms of my general mood.
No, I feel that,
It
to be honest. I've
yeah,
had a very similar week in a sense. Um,
yeah,
I've definitely found myself feeling quite angry
yeah,
and impatient and complacent this week. Well, more recently, actually, it's yeah, I don't know. I had
yeah,
a pretty good. I did a therapy session today. It was really
yeah,
good. It's really good because it doesn't really teach me anything new, but it really does help realign you. Like it just helps you sort of like, right, just straighten back on a little bit almost like a mental exercise would. Like how this would, I guess.
yeah.
It,
I'd say it's real.
it's just stimulating.
What's the difference really between two friends chatting and
Yeah.
you and a therapist chatting? Especially if you've been with that therapist for a while, you
Mm,
develop some kind of relationship with them.
yeah.
And I think that talking to a friend or talking to a therapist, they pretty much do the same things. You just, well, if it's a friendship where you're able to truly talk,
Yeah.
and actually talk about how you feel, and it just kind of offloads it off your chest, gets it off your chest, and then while it serves two purposes, you're getting it off your chest while simultaneously you're almost talking to yourself through your problems because you're figuring it out as you go as well. Or maybe the friend is giving their input. I know that obviously the therapist side of things, they're not necessarily giving their input, but they're asking the open questions that then allow you to further unravel the issues that you're talking about,
Yeah.
which enables you to obviously process and find answers or
Mm.
possible ways of tackling problems you're facing. So,
It's it's just incredible. Like I don't think there's anything more beneficial than having people you can rely on to understand exactly your mental state, like your where you currently are coming from, you know? Just the
yeah,
idea of being heard and seen is just in itself quite almost like just fulfilling and not I don't know, just it's almost like relieving, It's just like the idea that you know what I mean? Oh, I guess I'm not completely broken. It's just a bad week. It's just a bad
yeah,
month.
yeah,
It's not even bad. Bad's probably not the right word. It's just a low energy or just a bit
yeah,
of a dip. It's part of the cycle, isn't it? It's just it's
yeah,
an inevitable part of our journey is the peaks and the troughs, right? And that was one of the biggest things we touched on today, really, which I'd obviously like to share today, was just the idea of embracing the peaks and the troughs. It's so easy, especially when you're at the top of the mountain for so long. When you're really, really on that high of just success and good things happening. It really does sort of take away. You become unfamiliar with those dips again, right? And then when those dips do happen, you tend to almost you not be prepared for them, almost in a certain way, like almost
You
like you're
forget
yeah,
forget how they feel.
yeah, you almost just step back into being almost like untrained for them. But then
I
it's like,
find
go on.
I was just gonna say I find that the almost I don't want to say fascinating, but the interesting thing about depression is
Mm,
that it doesn't really matter how many times you've encountered depression. When you are in a depressed state, it always feels like a fresh new hell that you've not experienced before. Even though you've
yeah.
experienced it before, it doesn't really ever get any easiser and I'm not on about like when you've just got low mood. I'm talking in terms of people that have experienced genuine depression. Like it's not one of those things you return to and you're
Mm,
like, "Oh, well, I've experienced this before." Like, when you get
yeah.
sick, like you've had a stomach bug, you're kind of like, "Oh, I've done this before. Yeah, I'm probably gonna be on the toilet for a few hours, and then I know that I'll probably start to feel better." Like with low mood and well, I say low mood, more depression, which I class as something that's a bit more severe than low mood.
Yeah.
It's just always like this unbearable feeling, and you're like, oh, you dread it every time. She's like, oh, I've got to go through the motions again. But you
Yeah.
don't. The difference is you don't really know when the motions are going to end because it's dependent on the effort that you exert
Mm,
for still doing the things you need to do to bring you out of that low mood.
yeah.
If that makes sense.
They definitely do feel slightly uncontrollable, almost like your body needs that downtime in order to experience the euphoria and the good times, right? It's a balancing act, right? I think what obviously defines depression, I think, is the absence of any highs, of the absence of ever coming out of those dips, right? That's I guess what is considered clinical based depression, isn't it? It's just not actually ever alleviating the dips. It's this constant suffering almost, right? And I think we can both definitely, we're both definitely familiar with what that looks like at some point in our lives. That idea of just we're never getting out of this. That we are never ascending the mountain. We're always going to be stuck in the woods.
Yeah,
It's
it's
a
a really
yeah,
horrible feeling, but I mean, for
yeah,
me, put a positive spin on it for anyone
yeah. Of
watching that
course.
might be suffering with deeper side of depression, I found through my experience with depression that it was always when I was almost at my very lowest that I was like, for example, for me, when I was about to give up and go back on medication, it was always around those areas, uh, sorry, those periods of time where it was becoming unbearable and I was about to give up and go back on medication that there would be a breakthrough on the horizon. So like I would be about to give up on my personal journey, on my personal goals, and then there would be some kind of breakthrough mentally and I would feel incredible, which is really strange when we talk about highs and lows. Um,
Mm. A lot of breakthroughs, I think, happen when you really do reach the bottom of that pit, though, right?
yeah.
Which is absolutely bizarre because I fully understand what you're talking about.
Mm.
It's you really do need to hit rock bottom in order to see the ways out of it. It's like, okay, well, I'm here now. I've experienced pretty much the brunt of what this has to offer. Where am I going from here? Do I stay down here or do I find a way to ascend? And I think most people's inclination, most people don't want to be there. Like, I don't think people choose. There is the case that people obviously, people definitely have vices and people definitely suffer unintentionally in these situations. But I
Yeah.
think I think the majority of people that definitely do end up in these positions, and I think most people will be they will be here, at some point in our lives. Definitely,
Yeah, it's
we'll see that.
inevitable.
Yeah, we'll see that the bottom of that pit, and obviously look for ways to obviously ascend from there. And if I think that's just part of life. It's an inevitable part of the human experience. I think is the constant, pulling yourself from the shit and just learning from it every time, right? Um,
Yeah, you relate
yeah,
it in the physical world. We wouldn't be where we are now if we hadn't gone through very physical battles of figuring things out, of
yeah,
figuring out how to make fire, figuring out how to cook food, and figuring out how to survive for longer, figuring out what
mm,
food sustained us for longer. This is obviously going way back, that things that we forget now because we've got everything handed to us on a plate in terms of
yeah,
nutrients and stuff, or at least most places in the world do now. So yeah, it's all been
mm,
hard. It's all stemmed from hardship. Everything we've got now has stemmed from hardship in some way or another, and which is why it all interlinks, right? You can't have the good without the bad, like we touched on before. Just like in the last video, we touched on, um, can't have the highs without the lows, and the
mm,
the biggest point of growth is in the failings,
yeah,
in those failures. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting one.
yeah. I don't. I feel like the modern world doesn't give us enough opportunities to actually fail on a physical level, and I think that it's definitely our mind's way of clawing for some sense of suffering to then conquer, right? To an extent. I mean,
Mm,
obviously, that's what it feels like to me anyway. This is purely anecdotal, this is purely my experience. I feel like in order to have gotten where I am now, and in order to be the person I am now, I have had to almost create some sort of like synthetic amount of suffering in order to overcome, right? I climb a lot, I go on my bike with my friends. I love getting out the house and getting active. I truly don't believe that all the things that benefit my life now, I would truly I have this urge to do if it wasn't for this
mm.
almost like synthetic level of suffering that my body's been through over the years, through depression, through my anxieties. I don't feel like without that sort of like place, I would have ever gotten here and been able to appreciate where I am now. And I think that's one
Yeah,
of the biggest things I would I would sort of advise people is don't be so hard on yourself in your lowest moments, because I was, oh my god, man, I don't know about you, I've beat
yeah,
myself down so many times in my lowest moments, and
yeah,
it's just it's suffering unnecessarily. I feel like there is so much to learn from that place of suffering, from depression, from anxiety. There's so much to learn from these experiences, within those experiences, and you can come out stronger every single time. It's inevitable that we're going to go through them, in and out of them, but I think fundamentally, if you go in with a dare I say a growth mindset, with the idea that these things can be utilized in such a positive and nourishing way,
yeah,
it can make life so much more enjoyable fundamentally, I think. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
I think just touching on what you said, like briefly about beating yourself up, and
Mm,
again, this comes from a male perspective.
yeah.
I think men are really good at doing that for whatever
Yeah.
reason. I'm not really sure. There could be many reasons of why men are so good at
Mm,
beating themselves up. We could take it back to a primal level of feeling naturally, maybe like we need to provide and need to be the providers, or it could come from a parental level of fatherly figures or parental figures in general
yeah.
treating us like we're not good enough. Maybe that might be some people's experience. It could be many reasons, is what I'm saying. Um, and I was going to go back to something else you were saying as well about the kind of suffering side of things.
Mm,
I guess you could categorize suffering into, there's like involuntary suffering where I guess that would fall under the class of life's going to throw things at you whether you like it or not, that you are going to suffer. We can relate that to things such as losing someone that we love. I don't know. It could be sustaining a life changing injury. That's kind of what I would class as involuntary suffering, right? And then there's voluntary suffering or actively seeking some form of suffering,
mm,
which could be classed as, it could be classed as like exercise, going on something that challenges us.
Yeah.
That, you know, when you go climbing, for example, you know that you're going to challenge yourself. I know that you challenge yourself. I've seen you climb. Like, I can watch somebody work out and know if they're half-arsing it and not really trying, just as the way that I can watch somebody work out and know that they're
Yeah.
actively really pushing themselves to limits and learning. And when I watched you climb, I could straight away see that you actively challenge yourself and actively try to do routes that you can't yet do,
Yeah.
which is, to me, that is like what we just discussed, like falls under the voluntary suffering, or the voluntarily challenging yourself.
Yeah.
And both of those things can create very beneficial things. When it's voluntary, maybe even more so, because
Mm.
if you can do things, um is that a right word? Voluntarily? That is a
Yeah.
word, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you can do things voluntarily, to push yourself, then I feel like it does set you up for, a more it puts you in a more positive place for when the
Mm.
life stuff happens, you know, the stuff that you don't have control of.
I I
Yeah,
agree. Yeah.
so to summarize, to push yourself voluntarily is going to help you in those moments in life where something unexpected happens that is difficult.
That's such a good take. I never really considered that. Like, I understand the idea that obviously we have these sort of voluntary ways to obviously push our mind and bodies. I never really considered the fact that reason that that could be why the appeal for that obviously could be
Mm.
that because of the voluntary nature of that, it
Yeah.
takes away this sort of involuntary nature of like depression. Because obviously, I don't feel too fucking depressed when I'm climbing, when I'm exercising. These things end up feeling they reward me with a sense of well, they obviously provide dopamine, but you know, the euphoria and the
Yeah.
sense of accomplishment, which again is I guess dopamine, but it just feels like you almost gain a sense of control over suffering, right? And I never really considered that. I understood that it is just like it is basically just self hardship. You're basically doing these things, they're uncomfortable, but they
Yeah.
benefit your body and your mind. I never really considered the fact that my my sense of control over suffering might be one of the reasons why I enjoy it so much.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
just nice insight. It's just a nice angle to take on it. Really, I never really looked at it from that perspective. Really, so yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and I
really
and I
interesting.
think, I think there is also the side of it where eventually the voluntary suffering
Yeah.
can produce involuntary suffering, and I feel like I've witnessed
Mm.
that with you specifically
Go
in
on.
terms of, when you've hit, let's say, a wall with climbing, and you feel,
Mm. Yeah.
here's the important thing, this is the mental side of it.
Yeah.
You feel like you've ceased to progress. You absolutely have not ceased to progress, but
Yeah.
obviously we hit these walls, whether it's
Mm.
I just, this week's just been a shitty week of climbing, or for me this week's some weeks I feel incredible training the martial arts stuff, and I'm like,
Yeah.
damn, I've come so far, man. Like, I'm hitting moves and things like that. My jiu-jitsu movements improving, blah blah blah. And some weeks I feel incredible. Other weeks I feel like I'm at day one, and I'm like,
Mm.
what am I doing? Like, and I'm mentally overwhelmed myself, and I get frustrated. I know you've experienced that as well, the frustration.
Yeah.
Um, so
Absolutely.
yeah, it's like it can yeah, it's just interesting. I can't put my finger on what I'm trying to say here, to be honest with you, but just that, although it's a positive thing, when you get in your head at certain points of any game,
Mm.
like when you get good at something, there becomes a certain point where it's possible to get in your head. I think that's
Yeah.
where people sometimes will quit,
Yeah.
and not continue the journey. And the ones that do continue develop that mindset of, well, I know that if I just keep chipping away, eventually I have some kind of breakthrough and some kind of change happens.
Mm.
Um,
These things all have crossover, right? It's the idea of just
yeah,
being
yeah,
patient with your growth. It's the idea that within, you know, your lowest moments of depression, you know, this too shall pass. It's
yeah.
just being patient with you know, with where you are currently and where you're going to end up if you keep trying your best in life. That's all it is because there is no end
and
game. There's no perfection. There's no 100% achievement, goal. It's
exactly.
not. It's not a
Is
PS5
this
game.
also
So
is would it
yeah,
also be fair to say that this is where the, idea of balance comes in?
100%.
Like, it's not always gonna be really cool and
Mm.
fun, just like it's not always gonna be really shit and
That's it.
negative. It's like the balance of it all. Um,
It's always a balance, man. Always a
yeah,
balance. I think that's the one thing that I can't escape when I really look at these topics. Where almost any topic that I touch, when it
yeah,
comes to mental health, physical health, the one thing that always claws its way back in a very positive way, by the way, is the
mm,
idea of balance. On a
yeah,
physical level, in order to push yourself to your limits, you also need to take a step back, rest, and reflect on where you are and where really just look after your body. It's the same with your mind. You really do need to just, some days take a bloody off day and stop being so introspective. And, you need to go out and live a little. But sometimes you
yeah.
also do need to come back and think, okay, well, how am I doing? How am I getting on? You know?
That's the balance that we struggle with is,
Yeah.
I would say that we're more hardwired to be internally thinking and
Yeah.
not enough external stuff sometimes. So,
Yeah.
which we've both got a much better grasp on over more recent years is like
Mm,
realizing when we're being too internal and when we just
yeah.
need to actually shut off
Absolutely.
and get out and do something physical. I think that
100%.
the gardening for me helps that as well because I'm
Mm,
outside in nature. I'm kind of left to my own devices, just literally digging in the dirt, doing, and it's quite a primal thing, really, but it really helps get me out of my head and do
yeah.
physical things. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, I would say everyone's different, right? So some people are more physical and not introspective. So it's the
mm,
reverse for them. It's like, okay, chill out, take some time to look into yourself to figure out what's going on.
100%.
Um, but I think just again, just to briefly go back to the whole hardship thing, and I don't know if you noticed this, but I'd be interested to know your input, is that some of the most what I would class as well-rounded people that I know and kind of um, people that don't really have an ego are often people that have been through some real hardships, whether it's with like their health and things like that. But what I'm trying to say is, yeah, some of the most well-rounded individuals I know are people that have been faced with
Yeah.
quite big hardships in life, whether that's losing a parent at a young age or, health issues. Obviously, it's a choice. It's something they've had to overcome because the same kind of person could have experienced a loss and not dealt with it
Yeah.
in the most, but people could fall into addiction after experiencing loss or all kinds of other
Mm,
rabbit holes that you can go down to. But at the same time, I think if you choose to take that hardship and grow from it, then great growth and comfort can be had.
yeah.
um I, a very difficult thing to do when it's severe health stuff and loss. But yeah, I
Yeah.
stick by what I said before that I feel like that's also where great growth can be had.
Yeah, I was actually talking to a friend about this recently. One of my close friends lost his brother,
Yeah.
and we were talking, and I guess without getting too much into obviously what we were discussing because it was incredibly personal, and I
Yeah,
obviously
of
wouldn't
course.
share anything too
Yeah, of course.
obviously
Yeah.
personal in here, but we kind of ended up being quite introspective on it, and one of the things we did talk about was the idea of, well, you know, what kinds of people do we want in our lives? Do we want, or what kinds of people do we want to be? Do we want to be
Yeah.
well-rounded individuals who have been through hardship? Or do we want to be sort of quite surface level individuals that haven't had to deal with much of anything? And then another question sort of popped into our minds, which was like, well, if the case is that you can only grow from suffering,
Yeah.
from extreme suffering, then then it's not really much of a choice, is it? It's more just environmental. It's like, well, I guess yes, we are all gonna have to, I guess, lose people at some point, but I guess there are also people out there that will also spend a lot of their lives alone, and that's quite a sad thing
Very.
in itself,
Yeah,
almost.
see, I would say
You know,
there's the
it's
other
the other
extreme of,
extreme,
the
absolutely.
other extreme of loss is, becoming a person that's shut off.
Yeah.
I think that's not unrare to see either. You
No.
really love someone, you lose them, you shut yourself off emotionally
Yeah.
because you it's almost the perspective of, well, I put so much love and effort into this person and I lost them. I'm scared to put that same amount of love and affection into another person. I totally understand that. I don't,
Mm.
you know, I don't look down on anyone that's become like that, to be honest. Because, and the thing is, you rarely would know that. You might just meet someone who seems really miserable and not want to communicate with you, and you can take this mindset of, like, I would call this a simplified mindset or a judgment of, oh, they're a bit of a dick. And it's like, yeah, but you really don't know
No.
what's got them to be or act that way. You really don't know.
Yeah.
It could be that they used to be a really fun, loving, outgoing person and that they lost someone dear to them. Just the same way that not just emotionally shut off, but you can drown yourself in drugs or alcohol, or, you know, we're we're repeating what was said before. You can go
One or two ways.
one of
Yeah.
two ways. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's about all I can input on that. But it's there's just so many different routes, isn't there? Or, you know, a
Yeah.
lot of it choices, but again, you can't really place judgment on without knowing someone else's story. And even if you do know their story, it'd be wrong to place judgment, I think, because we're all different. We all cope with things differently.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that I've really taken away from today, and
Mm,
that I would like people who might be watching us to take away from today is don't put so much judgment and pressure on yourself to be a certain way today,
yeah.
because we have tomorrow. It's a combination of every day that you live that leads up to the person you will become. You can't get everything done in one day. These are things that I'm still really trying to grapple with and really feel
Yeah.
in my soul, honestly. I'm a perfectionist. I like to get things done, but everything is a balance. Everything does take time, and don't be so hard on yourself. Don't judge yourself, but also don't judge others, because just like we've been talking about, there is an infinite amount of things people can go through, in their day-to-day lives. And I think if we try and be a little bit less judgmental of ourselves and others, we'll just live a bit better. I think that's seems quite cliche in a way, but I think that really being able to feel that is deeply important for ourselves and for the world around us, I think.
Yeah, definitely. There's a saying there, and I definitely cannot remember it, but it's something to do with walking in other people's shoes, blah
Yeah,
de blah blah.
yeah, absolutely.
And it's a very, like, quite a profound saying, but it's completely escaped me. But yeah, I think that's a really fair point to say. Just take each day at a time. And when it gets really, you know, if you're someone that's struggling, something that helped me was taking it even each hour at a time, each minute at a time. When it
Mm,
was really bad, when it was
yeah,
really bad being in my own head, it came down to taking it each minute at a time.
yeah,
uh, you know, just doing one little thing. And then, you know, for me, at the extreme end of the spectrum, for me, what that looked like was those days that I really didn't want to get out of bed. It was like, oh, I'll just get out of bed and tidy this little bit of mess in the room over here, and then I'll go and
yes.
hobble back over to bed, and then, you know, I'll get up again, and before I know it, like you said about building things up over time, if
100%.
you do that throughout the day, before you know it, you look back, you've got a full tidy house, you know? So
Love that. I love that.
it all adds up.
Absolutely, man. That's beautiful. It's a beautiful sentiment, to be honest. I didn't even consider the idea of bringing it back. It's like, yeah, looking at it hour to hour, but even minute to minute, just looking at, bringing it back to wherever you need it to be, just to really, because, it's, as I say, it is so hard to break through to that idea that we are getting things done,
Yeah.
and, I guess if you look too big a picture, it can be very overwhelming. The idea that, okay, well, what have I achieved in my life? What have I achieved in the last 5 years? It's like, these are very large scale things. It's like, sometimes you just really need to be like, okay, did I brush my teeth today and make my bed? And there is absolutely people out there that are struggling with that, and
Yeah, yeah,
I was one of those people.
yeah.
I was that person at one point in my life. So if you're what the way I see it, if you're struggling and you've ended up watching this, you've made it to your computer, you're sitting there.
That's it.
I've that's an accomplishment in itself. The idea that you're, consuming self-help, that you're trying to be a part of a conversation. I think there's a lot to be said just in that, right?
Yeah, for sure. And also, I think that even when you think that you're doing nothing or you're sat around
Mm,
telling yourself you're doing nothing, there's always something in play in the background that is beyond your consciousness and awareness. Like it's all got its place. Even sitting around doing seemingly nothing, it's all there's always something going on, right?
absolutely, man. Yeah, I think
I think
that's a pretty solid place to wrap up, I think.
yeah, I'd agree.
Nice.
Definitely.